The galaxy had long believed in order. For thousands of years, the Galactic Concord dictated the rules of warfare. Conflicts were fought with honor, engagements were declared in advance, and weapons followed strict limitations. It was an era of stability, one where war was predictable, controlled. Then, humanity arrived. They were a young species, barely a few centuries into spaceflight, and yet, they rejected the carefully crafted traditions of the conquered. Where other species used diplomacy to expand, humanity used something far more terrifying: ingenuity. While galactic civilizations perfected their energy-based weapons, humanity dug deep into the laws of physics, discovering brutal and efficient means of destruction that no one had ever conceived. The first time the wider galaxy encountered human weaponry was during the Vrayan conflict. The Vrayan Dominion was an empire of war, a species that had conquered dozens of worlds and subjugated entire civilizations without much resistance. They believed in overwhelming firepower, using colossal warships armed with the most advanced energy-based weaponry. They had never lost a war, not once. So, when they arrived at Sol with a demand for immediate surrender, they expected a swift victory. Humanity refused. The Vrayan, amused by their defiance, launched an invasion fleet. Over 500 warships descended upon the human colonies, expecting to wipe them out within days. They did not anticipate what would happen next. The first shot fired by humanity changed the course of galactic history forever. It came from a single ship, the UNS Leviathan, a warship that was primitive by Concord standards. No shields, no plasma weaponry, no energy-based technology at all, but it carried something far worse: a railgun. The Vrayan fleet watched as a single projectile, no larger than a human's arm, was accelerated to near relativistic speeds and fired across the battlefield. It ignored their shields, simply bypassed them like they weren't even there. The lead Vrayan dreadnought, Telnar's Wrath, was torn apart instantly. The kinetic energy of the impact sent fragments of the ship in every direction, obliterating 5 other vessels in the process. The Vrayan panicked. Their shields, the technology they had relied on for centuries, were useless against this weapon. Plasma fire was exchanged, but human ships danced through the chaos, launching devastating railgun volleys that turned one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy into nothing more than drifting wreckage. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. Humanity had won. And the galaxy had learned a terrible truth. They had vastly underestimated the species from Sol. The galaxy had long believed in structure. For thousands of years, warfare had been an equation with predictable outcomes. The Galactic Concord, an alliance of the most dominant civilizations, ensured that battles followed a strict, almost ceremonial format. Wars were declared through official channels. Combatants were given time to prepare, and weapons were restricted by long-standing treaties to prevent excessive devastation. It was an era of stability, a time when war was waged not for destruction, but for control. Battles had rules. Weapons had limits. No one dared upset the balance. Then humanity arrived. They were a new species, a civilization barely out of its infancy compared to the millennia-old empires that ruled the stars. When humans reached the galactic stage, the Concord's bureaucrats categorized them as a minor power. Ambitious but harmless, a species that would either integrate peacefully or collapse under the weight of its own inexperience. The great civilizations saw no reason to fear them. Humanity lacked the technology of the elder races. They had no vast armadas, no planetary fortresses, no fleets of indomitable warships. But the galaxy had made a grave mistake. They had assumed that war was an art to be refined, a series of traditions to be perfected. Humanity saw war differently. To them, war was never about honor. It was about survival. And when faced with annihilation, they fought without mercy, without hesitation. Where others sought fairness, they sought victory. Where others imposed restrictions, they innovated without restraint. Their weapons were not bound by the traditions of the Concord. They were bound only by the unbreakable laws of physics, laws that humanity had learned to twist into the most devastating forms imaginable. First time the galaxy witnessed human warfare was during the Vrayan conflict. The Vrayan Dominion was not just another empire. It was one of the most feared military powers in known space. an expansionist war machine that had crushed countless civilizations beneath its heel. Their fleets were vast, their technology unmatched, their soldiers engineered for combat from birth. No species had ever withstood their conquests. None had even dared to try. When the Vrayan arrived at Sol, they did not come as diplomats, they came as conquerors. The message was simple. Humanity would surrender and integrate into the Dominion, or they would be wiped from existence. There were no negotiations, no compromises. The Vrayan had seen this scenario play out dozens of times. Most species capitulated immediately. Those that resisted were destroyed within days. The result was always the same. Humanity refused. The Vrayan, unsurprised, mobilized their invasion force. 500 warships, an entire sector fleet, descended upon the human colonies. It was meant to be a show of overwhelming force, a statement that resistance was futile. The Vrayan commanders expected a quick and decisive victory. They were wrong. The first shot fired in the war changed the course of galactic history forever. It did not come from a Vrayan warship. It came from a human vessel. The UNS Leviathan, a warship that, by Concord standards, was primitive. It had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, none of the sophisticated weaponry that defined modern warfare. The Vrayan laughed when they saw it on their sensors. To them, it was a relic, a crude metal husk that had no place on the battlefield. But then, the Leviathan fired. The weapon it used was unlike anything the Vrayan had ever encountered. It was not plasma. It was not laser-based. It was a railgun, a weapon that harnessed electromagnetic forces to accelerate a solid metal projectile to a fraction of the speed of light. The projectile struck the Vrayan flagship, Telnar's Wrath, with the force of a small asteroid. The shields, designed to deflect and absorb energy-based attacks, might as well have been non-existent. The slug passed through them effortlessly, slamming into the ship's hull at relativistic speeds. The impact did not merely damage the vessel, it obliterated it. The kinetic energy was so immense that the Telnar's Wrath was torn apart instantly, reduced to molten debris before its crew even had time to react. The explosion sent shockwaves through the Vrayan formation. Nearby warships were peppered with shrapnel traveling at such extreme velocities that it sliced through hulls like paper. Entire decks were vented into space. Panic spread through the fleet. The Vrayan had always fought with the assumption that shields would protect them from anything. But against human railguns, their shields were worthless. Every shot fired by human warships ignored their defenses completely, bypassing them as if they did not exist. The Vrayan's most advanced technology, the very foundation of their military supremacy, had just been rendered useless in the span of seconds. Their commanders scrambled to adjust their tactics. They ordered their ships to fire, unleashing torrents of plasma bolts and laser beams. But human ships were smaller, faster, more agile. They danced through the chaos, evading return fire with unnatural precision. And all the while, their railguns continued to fire. One by one, Vrayan warships were annihilated. Their dreadnoughts, the pride of their fleet, were shattered by kinetic strikes that pierced through them like spears through flesh. Their cruisers, designed for long-range engagements, were outmaneuvered and systematically destroyed. Even their fighter squadrons were decimated. Human point defense systems tracked and eliminated them before they could even get close. The battle that was supposed to be a swift and overwhelming victory for the Vrayan turned into a massacre. In less than 2 hours, half the invasion fleet had been annihilated. The surviving Vrayan commanders, their forces in disarray, made a desperate decision. They fled. The remnants of the once mighty fleet limped back to Dominion space, broken and humiliated. Never before had the Vrayan suffered such a catastrophic defeat. Never before had they faced an enemy that could counter their technology so completely. The Dominion's warlords demanded answers. How could a species so young, so technologically inferior, have done the impossible? The answer was simple. Humanity did not play by the rules, and this was only the beginning. The Vrayan had always believed themselves to be the ultimate masters of war. Their fleets were vast. Their weapons were the culmination of centuries of research, and their soldiers had been bred for combat, enhanced with genetic modifications and neural implants to make them faster, stronger, and deadlier than any natural-born warrior. They had never encountered an enemy that could challenge them, never faced a species that could stand against the overwhelming force of the Dominion. Yet, in a single battle, humanity had shattered that illusion. As the remnants of the Vrayan fleet limped back to Dominion space, the shockwaves of their defeat rippled through the galactic community. The great empires of the Concord, the elder races who had watched humanity's rise with mild curiosity, suddenly found themselves questioning everything they had believed about warfare. For eons, war had been a predictable affair, governed by strategy and balance. Now, a young species had upended those rules, had introduced a level of brutality and efficiency that had never been seen before. The true horror of humanity was not just their weapons, it was their willingness to use them. While the Vrayans struggled to understand how they had been defeated, humanity was already preparing for the next phase of the war. They knew the Dominion would not let their humiliation stand. A counterattack was inevitable, and this time it would be on a scale far greater than before. The Vrayan would not send a single fleet, they would send an armada. Humanity would not be given a second chance. But humanity had never needed second chances. On the industrial worlds of Sol, the forges burned day and night. The defeat of the Vryn fleet had been a statement, but it was not enough. Humanity had no illusions about mercy. The galaxy had already judged them as an anomaly, an aberration that needed to be corrected. If they were to survive, they would have to become something even worse than what the Conquered feared. They would have to become legends. The weapons of the first battle had been devastating, but they had been merely the beginning. Humanity had always been defined by one singular trait, their ability to adapt. In the span of weeks, new weapons were developed, new strategies refined, new horrors unleashed upon the drawing boards of Earth's war councils. The railguns that had torn through the Vrayan fleet were improved, made even deadlier. They were redesigned with higher velocity slugs, kinetic warheads capable of shattering entire dreadnoughts with a single strike. But kinetic weapons were only the start. The Dominion had relied on energy weapons, believing them to be the pinnacle of warfare. Humanity had other ideas: mass driver torpedoes, guided munitions accelerated to near-light speeds, were constructed in the orbital shipyards. Unlike conventional torpedoes, which relied on explosive payloads, these weapons carried nothing but raw mass, propelled so fast that they did not need explosives. The sheer kinetic force upon impact was enough to cause catastrophic destruction. One torpedo, traveling at these speeds, could reduce a warship to a rapidly expanding cloud of debris. The Vrayan had energy shields. Humanity designed weapons that ignored them. The first warhead of the Nemesis-class bomb was tested on an abandoned asteroid station near the edge of the Sol system. Unlike traditional nuclear warheads, which relied on fission or fusion, this weapon utilized a new principle, an exotic matter reaction that converted mass directly into energy with nearly perfect efficiency. When it detonated, the explosion was unlike anything ever seen before. A shockwave of raw force erupted from the impact site, but more terrifying was what followed, an energy cascade that disrupted subatomic cohesion, unraveling the very molecular bonds of anything caught within its radius. Metal structures didn't just melt, they disintegrated into their base elements, leaving behind only an expanding cloud of plasma. The asteroid station ceased to exist. The weapon was deemed too monstrous for conventional use. The humans built 500 of them. Humanity's technological advancements were staggering, but it was not just their weapons that made them a nightmare. It was their soldiers. The Conquered's armies were composed of highly trained professionals, disciplined warriors who fought with honor and precision. The Dominion's troops were bioengineered killers, augmented beyond natural limits. Yet neither could comprehend the nature of a human soldier. When the Vrayan finally returned for their revenge, they did not bring a single fleet. They brought an armada, 1,000 warships, drawn from every sector of the Dominion. A force so overwhelming that the elder races of the Conquered could only watch in silence. The Vrayan had learned from their defeat. They had adjusted their tactics, reconfigured their ships to withstand kinetic bombardment. This time, they would not be caught off guard, but neither would humanity. The Vrayan fleet arrived in orbit above a human colony, expecting to find a desperate defense, a last stand against impossible odds. What they found instead was a world already prepared for their arrival. Orbital platforms, bristling with railgun turrets, unleashed a hailstorm of kinetic death. torpedo batteries fired at such high velocity that even the most advanced Vrain warships could barely maneuver in time. But, even as the battle raged in orbit, something far worse was waiting for the invaders on the surface. When the Vrain ground forces landed, they expected to fight a conventional war. They brought legions of battle-hardened warriors, armored walkers, and mechanized divisions. They had never faced human infantry. The first wave of human soldiers moved through the ruins like shadows, silent and unseen. Their weapons were not energy rifles, not plasma casters, but something infinitely more terrifying. Hyper-velocity coil guns that fired projectiles so fast they didn't just kill, they obliterated. Limbs were severed in an instant, armor was punctured as if it were made of paper, and cover was rendered meaningless as rounds tore through solid rock with ease. And then came the worst of them. The Vrain had always fought enemies who valued self-preservation. Every species they had conquered had feared death, had fought with the hope of survival. But human shock troopers had no such illusions. They were clad in powered armor that turned them into walking fortresses, exoskeletons reinforced with self-repairing alloys and kinetic dampeners. They moved faster than any warrior should have, reacted before the Vrain could even register their presence. They fought without hesitation, without fear. The Vrain had thought themselves masters of war. They had thought their soldiers were the deadliest force in the galaxy. And yet, as they watched their warriors fall one by one, they realized the truth. They had never known war. Not like this. The Vrain were not accustomed to fear. Their species had ruled the stars for millennia, crushing opposition with ruthless efficiency. Yet, as the battle for humanity's colony world unfolded, fear seeped into their ranks like a slow, insidious poison. It began as a whisper among the commanders, a flicker of doubt as they watched their most advanced warships crumple under kinetic bombardment. But soon, it spread like wildfire. It was in the hesitant step of a Vrain officer, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. It was in the widened eyes of a soldier who saw a comrade torn apart by an unseen sniper round. It was in the trembling hands of an engineer struggling to restore a failing shield generator, knowing the next impact would turn his entire battalion into smoldering wreckage. Humanity had become something the Vrain could not understand. They did not fight like the conquered races of the past. They did not rely on superior numbers, nor did they fight for honor or for the promise of survival. They fought like creatures possessed, like beings who had long accepted death but refused to go quietly. The sheer brutality of their tactics was something no galactic military doctrine had ever accounted for. The orbital war had been the first horror the Vrain endured. Humanity's railguns, once thought to be mere crude relics of the past, had proven themselves superior to the Dominion's most advanced defenses. The Vran had adapted their shields to absorb energy weapons, yet these new projectiles ignored shielding entirely. They struck with such force that even warships the size of cities crumpled as if they were made of glass. The Vran command had believed their sheer numbers would be enough. 1,000 ships against a mere fraction of that number. But in the cold vacuum of space, it had become evident that numbers meant nothing when the enemy could erase an entire dreadnought with a single, kinetic impact. When the Vrain fleet finally broke apart and its survivors limped away from orbit, the war descended to the surface. Here, they believed the advantage would finally shift in their favor. Vran warriors had been bred for combat, their muscles reinforced with synthetic fibers, their reflexes enhanced with neural augmentations. They were taller, stronger, faster than any human. Their armor was forged from battle-tested alloys that had never failed against any known species. The Dominion's doctrine dictated that planetary warfare was their domain. Once their boots touched the ground, there was no force in the galaxy that could oppose them. But doctrine meant nothing in the face of human ingenuity. The moment the first Vrain landing craft touched the soil of the human colony, the ground itself erupted in fire. They had expected resistance, but they had not expected the very terrain to betray them. Mines, concealed beneath layers of rock and dirt, detonated in unison, turning the landing zone into a killing field. Some of these were conventional explosives, but others were something far worse. Sonic warheads, designed to destabilize molecular cohesion, reduced entire platoons to liquefied remains. Magnetic disruptors tore weapons from the hands of soldiers, leaving them defenseless in the open. But it was not the technology that broke the Vrain. It was the men and women who wielded it. The human infantry did not engage in the way the Vrain expected. They did not line up in formation, did not march into battle in predictable patterns. They struck from the shadows, unseen and untraceable. One moment, a squad of Vrain soldiers would be advancing, confident in their superior firepower. The next, they would be falling one by one, their bodies riddled with holes before they could even determine where the shots were coming from. The human snipers were something out of nightmares. Their weapons did not fire beams of light or superheated plasma. They fired metal, tiny projectiles moving so fast that they ignored armor, passing through multiple targets before embedding themselves deep into steel-reinforced structures. Single shot could turn a Vrain warrior's head into a red mist before the rest of his unit even registered the sound of gunfire. The Vrain had never encountered an enemy that could engage them from such extreme distances with such horrifying precision. But the worst was yet to come. As the Vrain attempted to regroup, the ground forces of humanity finally emerged. They were clad in armor unlike anything seen before, hulking exoskeletons of composite alloys, reinforced with reactive plating that absorbed kinetic impact. Their helmets concealed their faces, making them appear as faceless titans of war, and they moved with a fluidity that defied their size, darting between cover, their weapons barking out rapid bursts of hypervelocity death. The Vrain fought back, but it was like fighting a storm with a blade. Their weapons, once considered the pinnacle of Dominion technology, barely made a dent in the humans' armor. Plasma bolts dissipated upon impact. Bladed weapons, once able to cut through reinforced hulls, were turned aside as if they were no more than twigs against steel. The humans did not just withstand the onslaught, they advanced, and they slaughtered. A Vrain commander, once proud and confident in his species' supremacy, watched in horror as his forces were dismantled. The humans did not hesitate. They did not stop. They did not break formation, even when their own fell. Their medics dragged wounded soldiers away under the cover of suppressive fire, and when the injured could not be saved, they were given a final shot to ensure they did not fall into enemy hands. The Vrain had always believed war was a matter of willpower, of discipline, but what they faced now was something else entirely. The humans fought as if they had nothing to lose, and perhaps that was the truth of it. The Dominion had waged wars of conquest for generations. Their species had always known that, should they fall, there would be another empire to take their place. The balance of power would shift, but civilization would continue. But humanity? Humanity had been backed into a corner since the day they reached the stars. They were surrounded by species that saw them as an anomaly, a mistake. They had no allies, no fallback, no promise of mercy should they fail. And so they fought as though survival was not enough. They fought to send a message. The battle stretched on for days, and as the Vrain's numbers dwindled, as their forces crumbled, the full realization settled in. This war was not just about territory. It was not about power or control. It was about something far more terrifying. It was about what humanity had become. The Vrain retreated, what little remained of their forces scattering into the night. But there was no victory in their survival, no relief. Only the certainty of a nightmare given form. The galaxy had long feared the possibility of a species that could not be controlled, could not be reasoned with, could not be broken. They had hoped such a species would never arise, and now they knew they had been wrong. The Vrain retreat was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far worse. Across the Dominion, the survivors of the battle whispered of horrors they could scarcely comprehend, stories of weapons that defied all logic, of soldiers who did not break, of a species that had no concept of surrender. But it was not just fear that spread through the Dominion. It was doubt. For the first time in millennia, the rulers of the galaxy questioned their own supremacy. They had always assumed their military dominance was absolute, that no force could challenge their reign. But now, they had seen the truth. Humanity was not a minor threat to be crushed under the weight of tradition and technology. They were a storm waiting to consume the stars. The Dominion's High Council convened in secrecy, their great halls once filled with arrogance now thick with dread. The defeat at the colony world had shattered their confidence, but it was the reports that followed that truly shook them. humanity had not been content with defending their world. They had taken the war to the Dominion itself. It began with disappearances, entire patrol fleets vanishing. Without a trace, their last transmissions garbled with static and screams. Then came the sabotage, military outposts destroyed from within, key supply lines cut, weapons depots reduced to smoldering ruins. There was no declaration of war, no formal engagement, just the slow, methodical unraveling of an empire that had never known fear. The Dominion tried to respond in the only way they knew how. Overwhelming force. They mobilized fleets greater than any seen in generations, sent warships the size of continents into human space, with the intent to burn their worlds to ash. And yet, for all their strength, for all their numbers, they found themselves fighting ghosts. Human warships did not engage in open battles unless they chose to. They struck like phantoms, appearing from the void with no warning, unleashing destruction, and vanishing before a counterattack could be mounted. Their ships were smaller, faster, designed for precision rather than brute force. But it was their weapons that truly terrified the Dominion's admirals. The first recorded use of the disruptor warhead sent shockwaves through the Dominion's military. Unlike traditional explosives, these weapons did not rely on heat or concussive force. Instead, they unleashed a cascade of electromagnetic pulses so powerful that they rendered entire fleets inoperative in seconds. Shields failed, engines died, weapons refused to fire. And then, as the helpless Vrain ships drifted in the void, human boarding parties descended upon them. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. The humans did not simply seize control of the ships, they eradicated every last soldier aboard, leaving nothing but blood-streaked corridors and the cold silence of the dead. But even this was not the worst of humanity's arsenal. That honor belonged to the singularity cannons. The Dominion had long believed that the manipulation of gravity on a large scale was impossible, that the creation of artificial singularities was a myth spoken of only in theoretical physics. But humanity had turned theory into reality. Their most advanced warships carried weapons that could rip the fabric of space itself, unleashing miniature black holes that devoured everything in their path. Entire battle groups were erased in an instant, drawn into the endless abyss, their final screams lost in the void. The war was no longer a matter of conquest. It had become a desperate struggle for survival. The Dominion had never before faced an enemy that adapted so quickly, that learned from every encounter, that refused to fight by the rules of war. Humanity did not seek territory. They did not seek power. They sought vengeance. And they pursued it with a relentlessness that defied all logic. They infiltrated Dominion worlds, not as conquerors, but as assassins and saboteurs. High-ranking officials were found dead in their own palaces, their bodies marked with the insignia of a species that had been cast aside and underestimated. Entire cities fell into chaos as critical infrastructure failed without warning, as diseases previously unknown to the Dominion spread like wildfire. And then, the Dominion learned of the worst weapon of all. Not a machine, not a bomb, but an idea. Humanity had never fought alone. Even in their darkest moments, they had found allies among the stars, races that had once lived under the boot of the Dominion, now rising against their oppressors. The rebellion that humanity ignited was unlike anything seen before. It was not an organized military force. It was chaos incarnate. Planets that had once been loyal to the Dominion erupted into civil war. Entire fleets turned on one another as long buried grudges resurfaced. The Dominion's strength had always been in its unity, in the absolute belief that its rule was unchallenged. But now, there was doubt. And doubt was more dangerous than any weapon. The final blow came in the form of a message, broadcast across every Dominion world, every fleet, every colony. A single, simple transmission. No threats, no demands. Just a voice, human and unyielding, speaking words that sent terror through the hearts of the once mighty rulers of the stars. We are humanity. We have bled, we have suffered, we have been cast into the abyss. But we have returned, and we do not forget. The war was no longer about victory. It was about survival. The Dominion's High Council had long believed that they were the inevitable rulers of the galaxy. For thousands of years, they had crushed rebellions before they could bloom, silenced dissent before it could spread, and annihilated species before they could become threats. But humanity was different. Humanity had not risen through careful diplomacy or slow technological advancement. They had not bowed before the Dominion's will or accepted their place in the galactic order. Instead, they had become something far worse, something the Dominion had never truly faced before, a nightmare made real. The Dominion's war strategy had always relied on overwhelming force. They had the numbers, the technology, and the experience to win any conflict before it could truly begin. But against humanity, numbers meant nothing. Every fleet they sent into human space was either annihilated or vanished without a trace. The Dominion's commanders tried to adjust, deploying new strategies, new formations, but none of it mattered. Humanity did not fight wars in the traditional sense. They did not meet the enemy in glorious battle. They struck in the dead of night, appearing where they were least expected, using weapons that defied all conventional military doctrine. One such weapon was the infamous Phantom Array, an advanced electronic warfare system that turned the very fabric of reality into an illusion. Dominion warships equipped with the most sophisticated targeting systems found themselves firing at ghosts. Holographic projections so perfectly simulated that even their own sensors could not distinguish them from reality. Dozens of Dominion fleets wasted entire arsenals against these illusions, only to realize too late that their true enemy had been circling behind them, waiting for the moment to strike. By the time they saw the real human warships, it was over. The Dominion called them cowards, unwilling to engage in open combat, but the humans didn't care. War wasn't about honor. It was about survival. And then there was the silence engine. The Dominion had long believed that control over communication was one of the keys to their power. Through their vast network of quantum relays, they coordinated entire war fronts across the stars, ensuring that their forces always acted as one. But one by one, those relays began to fail. Not through sabotage, not through direct attacks, but through something far worse: erasure. Human infiltrators deployed the silence engine on critical relay points, devices that unraveled Dominion communication technology at the subatomic level. Messages distorted into incomprehensible gibberish. Orders arrived minutes too late or never at all. Admirals found themselves commanding fleets with no idea where their reinforcements were, no way to warn their comrades of impending attacks. And in the vacuum of silence, human warships arrived like reapers, striking isolated targets with precision so devastating that entire Dominion sectors fell without a single distress call escaping. But even this was not the true source of the Dominion's terror. The real nightmare was something they could not see, could not hear, could not fight against with fleets and armies. It was a force that had been growing in the darkness, spreading through whispers and shadows, corrupting the very foundations of their empire. It was humanity's greatest weapon, the one thing that no Dominion strategist had ever accounted for: the will to resist. For countless years, the Dominion had ruled through fear. Worlds that fell under their control learned quickly that defiance was met with swift annihilation. They had turned entire civilizations into obedient subjects, their cultures erased, their histories rewritten. But humanity was different. They did not merely fight, they inspired. The weapons they unleashed upon the Dominion were not just machines of destruction, but symbols. Each battle was a message, each victory a beacon, calling out to the subjugated species across the stars. And those species began to listen. The rebellion did not start with grand armies or coordinated assaults. It started with whispers, with small acts of defiance. Dominion officers found their orders ignored, their supply lines disrupted by seemingly random malfunctions. Civil administrators vanished overnight, entire planetary governors found assassinated in their own palaces. And then, entire garrisons of Dominion soldiers woke up to find their weapons gone, their security systems overridden. The resistance had always been there, buried under centuries of fear, waiting for a spark, and humanity had provided it. The Dominion responded as they always had, with fire and fury. They burned cities, wiped out populations, turned entire worlds into smoldering ruins. But it was too late. For every world they crushed, 3 more rose up in its place. The more they tried to silence the rebellion, the louder it became, And through it all, humanity remained in the shadows, orchestrating the downfall of an empire that had once believed itself invincible. But the final, most horrifying truth was yet to come. In their desperation, the Dominion turned to their last resort, a doomsday fleet, a force so overwhelming that it had been kept in reserve for centuries, meant only for the absolute destruction of a civilization. They called it the Annihilation Armada, a fleet of world killers, ships the size of moons, equipped with weapons that could tear entire planets apart. It was meant to be the end of humanity, the final solution to a war that had spiraled out of control. And then, without warning, the fleet was gone. Not destroyed, not defeated in battle. Gone. One moment, the Annihilation Armada had been en route to human space, an unstoppable force of destruction. The next, it had vanished from all Dominion records, wiped from existence as if it had never been there. No wreckage was found, no distress calls, no survivors. The most powerful fleet in Dominion history had ceased to exist in a single, terrifying instant. And then, the final message came. A single transmission, broadcast across the Dominion's most secure channels. No demands, no ultimatums, just a voice, cold and calm, delivering a message that sent waves of panic through the highest ranks of the Dominion's leadership. The war is already over. You just haven't realized it yet. The Dominion had always believed that fear was the ultimate weapon. For millennia, they had ruled the stars with an iron grip, turning entire civilizations into obedient subjects through the sheer terror of their overwhelming power. Their war fleets numbered in the millions. Their planetary fortresses were unbreakable, and their technology was unmatched. They had seen countless species rise and fall, their resistance crushed beneath the relentless march of Dominion supremacy. But now, for the first time in their long history, the Dominion understood what it meant to be afraid. The disappearance of the Annihilation Armada sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of the Dominion. This was no minor loss. This was the single most powerful fleet ever assembled, a force meant to erase humanity from existence. And yet, it had simply vanished. No wreckage, no distress signals, no final transmissions. It was as if the fleet had never existed at all. Panic spread through the Dominion's war councils, their most brilliant strategists left grasping at shadows. The humans had done something impossible, something that defied every known law of warfare. Had they developed a weapon so advanced it could erase entire armadas in an instant? Had they mastered a form of warfare beyond the Dominion's comprehension? Desperate for answers, the Dominion launched a full-scale investigation. They scoured the last known coordinates of the fleet, analyzing every fragment of data, every anomaly in the surrounding space. What they found only deepened their terror. The space where the fleet had vanished was wrong. The very fabric of reality had been disturbed, as if something vast and unseen had passed through, leaving behind faint echoes of its presence. Dominion scientists struggled to make sense of the readings, but there were no explanations. The fleet had not been destroyed in battle. It had not suffered a catastrophic failure. It had simply been plucked from existence. Rumors spread like wildfire through the Dominion ranks. Some whispered that humanity had uncovered a weapon of unspeakable power, a force capable of unmaking matter itself. Others believed the humans had allies, something ancient and unknowable, lurking in the black depths of space, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the truth was far worse. The Dominion was not just losing a war. They were losing control. The first signs of collapse came in the form of silence. Entire Dominion colonies went dark, their communication relays severed, their ruling officials disappearing without a trace. Fleets sent to investigate simply failed to report back. The Dominion's leaders, once confident in their absolute control, found themselves grasping at phantoms. Then came the uprisings. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology. It had never been their warships, their stealth tactics, or even their ability to strike from the shadows. No. The true weapon was far more insidious. It was the idea they had planted, the ember of defiance that had taken root in the hearts of the Dominion's countless subjugated species. For centuries, those species had lived in fear, believing that rebellion was futile, that the Dominion's rule was eternal. But now, they saw the truth. The Dominion could be beaten. Humanity had proven it. And so, The fires of resistance erupted across the stars. Entire worlds rose up in defiance, their people armed not with sophisticated weaponry, but with the one thing the Dominion could never truly defeat: hope. A single Dominion garrison, once enough to hold an entire planet in check, now found itself overwhelmed by millions of civilians, their rage uncontainable. Dominion soldiers, once feared across the galaxy, now found themselves hunted, their armor stripped from their bodies, their war banners burned in the streets. The empire that had once seemed unshakable was crumbling from within. And humanity? Humanity was nowhere to be found. Their fleets did not march in grand displays of conquest. Their armies did not occupy the Dominion's crumbling cities. They did not need to. The war had already been won. The moment the Dominion lost their ability to control through fear, the moment their enemies saw them for what they truly were: mortal, fallible, breakable, their fate was sealed. The Dominion's last stand came in the form of a desperate retreat. The High Council, the rulers who had once dictated the fate of entire species, abandoned their throne world, fleeing into the unknown, searching for a place where they could rebuild. But even in exile, they were haunted. Wherever they ran, they found humanity's shadow waiting for them. Their escape ships malfunctioned without explanation. Their hidden refuges were discovered before they could establish new strongholds. It was as if the humans were everywhere and nowhere at once. The final message from the Dominion's last ruler was broadcast across what remained of their empire, a transmission filled with quiet, hollow terror. "You do not see them," he whispered. "You do not hear them. But they are there, always there, watching, waiting. And when the time comes, they will finish what they started." And with that, the Dominion ceased to exist. The vast empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia, the conquerors who had once seemed unstoppable, had been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale, a nightmare whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. And humanity? Humanity remained a mystery. Some believed they had simply returned to the shadows, content to let the galaxy shape itself in their absence. Others believed they had ascended to something greater, something beyond the reach of mortal understanding. But one thing was certain: no empire, no warlord, no conqueror would ever forget the name of the species that had unmade the most powerful force in the galaxy: humanity, the nightmare that never truly left.